8, Jesus said, "Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." Tonight, Leslie Brown's going to share her testimony, and she's going to be baptized.
I grew up in a home with very loving and supportive parents who took me to church. I remember having a strong belief in God, praying to Him, and feeling love for Him because I knew He Himself was a loving God. However, I didn't really know Him. I knew very little about His character and less about the gospel of Jesus Christ, what Jesus did for me in His life, death, and resurrection, and why I even needed that in the first place. By the age of 15, I had decided that God was not real. Having no foundation of Scripture to rely on, I slowly came to the conclusion that the universe and all its components were a beautiful and magnificent accident. I no longer believed in anything beyond the physical realm. I had become an atheist. At some point, I realized that if this were true, I could do whatever I wanted with my life. So I began to walk the path of determining my own destiny without any regard for moral or spiritual absolutes. There were no longer any barriers to what I thought was freedom, believing and doing whatever I thought was best for me. However, it wasn't long before God began to interrupt my personal journey. Without my asking and without my permission, God showed up. Throughout early high school, a few friends had been faithful to invite me to church and without my knowing it to pray for me. I loved them and I appreciated their friendship, but I was content to reason my way out of their religious convictions and simply admire them for their morality and resolve. About a year later, however, I began to experience a sort of awakening. Over the course of several months, my atheistic leanings were challenged in a variety of ways, and I slowly began to wonder if I was wrong about God. I began to pray simple prayers to God, asking Him to help me believe in Him if He were actually there. Among the most significant of the events through which God revealed Himself to me was the most beautiful, breathtaking sunset I'd ever seen. In one moment, I was overwhelmed and humbled by the thought that perhaps the universe was not, in fact, an accident. The most impactful event, though, occurred at a church I'd been invited to. For the first time, I saw Christian love. As I watched these people interact with one another, I was finally certain that I was dead wrong about God. These people knew something or someone that I didn't know. It was real, and it was beautifully compelling to me. Soon after, I knelt beside my bed one night and asked God to save me. I knew I needed to be forgiven and saved, and that my life needed to change. However, I still didn't know the gospel. I didn't know that God saves and accepts people based on the work of Jesus Christ instead of their own goodness, sincerity, and resolve. So I said a sincere prayer, was baptized, and thought everything was okay. Over the next 12 years, I studied, learned, and grew in my knowledge of God. At the age of 28, though, I began to wonder if I'd ever truly been saved, and I cried out to God for help. A couple of weeks later, a friend handed me an extra copy of a study of Galatians that her small group was doing. They just happened to have one left over. As I worked through the study, it was as though I was being set free from a lifetime of the bondage of trying to appease God with my own works. The gospel was finally becoming clear, and it was transforming me. 2 months later, after the most amazing period of my life, I found myself plunging into a deep darkness. It felt as if 1,000 arrows of doubt and despair were being hurled at me, shrouding the gospel with questions and accusations toward God regarding His love, goodness, and wisdom. For almost 2 years, I wrestled and fought until I thought I could no longer continue. I had absolutely no strength left. But by the mercy of God, several people in my life intervened in ways that led to a period in which God took me aside, assured me of His goodness, helped me to see His wisdom, and granted me the faith to believe the gospel, that Jesus really did live a perfect life in my place, took God's punishment for my sins on the cross, died in my place, and was then raised to represent me now at the right hand of God. Now I'm confident that God can love, pursue, and save even the worst of sinners because He has saved me, an unbelieving questioner, accuser, and doubter of a holy God. Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrates His own love toward us and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And as Mary said in her song to God, "My soul magnifies the Lord, for He who is mighty has done great things for me."
Again, baptism is an outward sign of an inward change, something that's happened in someone's life that we tie to the gospel of Christ. In Romans chapter 6, it says, "We were buried therefore with Him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Our strength to live as believers comes from him alone. And it's my privilege to baptize you now in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, buried with him in baptism, raised to walk in newness of life.